My background is in software development and in consulting, and virtually on every single project over the past maybe 15 years, I've been using Confluence in one way or another. So Confluence is a corporate wiki with some collaboration and security tools built in. And because it lets you edit content and create content so easily, more often than not, companies end up with a bit of a mess of a Confluence. So people use same terms to mean different things, different terms to mean the same thing, and so on. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to actually build an add-on for Confluence that lets you import controlled vocabulary of some sort, taxonomy or thesaurus, and use it across the pages, whether to say what you're talking about, to specify the type of the page, and so on. And so Taxonomies for Confluence was born. So Taxonomies for Confluence is an add-on that lets you use SKOS controlled vocabularies to index pages, do better search, build table of contents, and also use it to create Confluence content using Sparkle. So you can plug Confluence into knowledge graphs. Let me start with saying that taxonomies are only useful if you're actually using them to index and retrieve information. And as you start using them, they start to change, and because you receive user feedback. And so obviously before we start using taxonomies, we need to get taxonomies into Confluence, right? And so because of this possible change in taxonomies, we need to think about versioning. And so Taxonomies for Confluence introduced this idea of a snapshot. And really, snapshot is just a collection of SKOS taxonomies. They can be in draft, current, or historical state. Taxonomies that are current are visible to everybody within Confluence. People can see them, people can use them on the pages. And taxonomies in draft and historical state can be used by administrators. So taxonomies are imported into draft, and then draft can be moved onto current, and then it becomes useful. As that happens, the content is refactored and kept in sync with taxonomies. So the example that I'll use throughout this little demo is example of a investment management firm that want to manage some policies, right? So for example, we'll need to import taxonomy for policy, we need to import some capability model, and let's say they want to use industry classification scheme, and I'll use an Australian example, so I'll use ANSIC. And probably one other thing that we can do is we can import some of the taxonomies available from other sources, right? So here's a good example. Publication Office of the European Union publishes quite a bit of different controlled lists, and we'll just use confidentiality level from here, right? So I'm an admin. Let's actually start and import some taxonomies. There's a mini catalog. So let's say we want taxonomy for Confluence, and we want Australian and New Zealand standard industrial classification. So this obviously takes a couple of seconds usually. So taxonomies are imported. Once they are imported, you can see how many schemes there are, how many concepts, and so on. So taxonomy for policy is obviously fairly straightforward. Principal policy standard control process, but ANSIC is obviously a little bit more involved, right? Okay, so that's fine. So you can see that there is nothing in current. There are some bits in draft. So let's actually import a capability model as well that we wanted to use. So in this case, it will be a little taxonomy I built a while ago, taxonomy of capabilities, investment firm capabilities. So with that, we obviously have three schemes, right? So we have investment management capability model. And I guess just to show that we can also import something from fairly public source. Let's just pick capability levels that that Office of the European Publication Office of the European Union are publishing and making available. So, right, so we have 4 now. So obviously there are some confidentiality levels that we can use. Okay, so we have a draft, we have current. Let's just, well, we don't want to clear the snapshot, but we definitely want to switch from draft to current. So there's a bit of a processing step. So in this case, I don't have any pages. There's nothing to refactor, and I can simply complete the switch. And that's obviously fairly straightforward. Okay, great. So now we have a new draft, which is empty, and we have a current one, which has 4 taxonomies in it. And you can see actually what the differences are. So you can see how many, for example, how many concepts are added, updated, or removed, and how many pages were impacted. Okay, so taxonomies are in. What can we actually do? So now, if I'm a user in Confluence, I can start creating pages. So let's say we're the investment company that want to, let's say, manage standards for research. So let's create this page. Let's give it a name. And let's say, I won't type the entire standard because these do take time. But so once you have some text, you can actually start inserting related concepts. And to do that in Confluence, you can just add a macro. And one of the things you get with taxonomies for Confluence is this related macro, right? So let's just say we want this sentence to read reasonably well. And so let's say this is all the standard we want. So we just say it's research management standard. Standard applies to researchers of Tolson Semantics Limited and all information collected about companies in nickel ore mining. You can add as many of these tags, obviously, as many of these concepts as you want. So that's one thing we can do. We can create a page and we can put a related term into it. Another thing we can do, obviously, is with taxonomies for Confluence, you get some standard properties. So one is type of document, and it's pretty much following Dublin core. So you can set the type, you can set the subject, and all of these terms on the page are relations. So let's just find the type. So what are we creating? We're creating a standard, right? Okay, great. This is a standard. Good stuff. And then subject, in my capability model, I think I have company research. Don't I? Yeah, I do have company research. Great. So this is obviously just one page, but as you start creating them, you're using the same terms. It's easy to understand what language you're using. And because of that, you can actually start building tables of contents quite a bit easier. So let's just create a page that will be a table of contents, and it will list all of the standards we've created to date. So I'll just call this page all our standards. And okay. So one of the macros that it adds is called about unrelated. So what you can actually do is it's pretty much like a query builder. So you can build a simple query and then generate table of contents based on it. So let's say we want to see all the standards. Where's the standard? 'Standard? So here it is. And we want perhaps, let's say, 1 to 10. 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 1 relation to be. So let's say we want to see all standards that mention nickel ore mining. And this guy. So now if you publish this, well, you can actually see what the table of contents looks like already. There's only one page, there's only one standard about companies in nickel ore mining. But that's what the table of contents look like. And so to bring it back a little bit to the original poll. So actually I need to stop sharing this because probably kills the visibility of the of everything else I'm doing. But so to sort of thinking back, there's one of the issues is that everybody's building their own hierarchies of pages. So these hierarchies of pages on the left, they get quite unwieldy and they get quite different. So what you may want to do is once you build a taxonomy, you might want to see how all of the pages actually align to that taxonomy. So you might want to see, okay, what are all of my policies? What are all of my standards? So this gives you a bit of an alternative view to the typical list of pages and hierarchies of pages here. And you can actually navigate the pages using the taxonomy that you created. So in this case, there's obviously only one standard, but as you create more and more pages that conform to this taxonomy, and this means in this case a relation or type or subject, you can see them here. Well, likewise, if you're navigating ANSIC, you can actually see that there will be pages at one level of the hierarchy or another. One of the original inspirations for taxonomies for Confluence is this use case of larger companies buying packages for either data governance or enterprise architecture or sort of similar things. Some content goes there and lives there, some of the more structured content perhaps, and then a lot of less structured content lives in Confluence. And so how do you bring the two together is the question. And so with that in mind, let me actually show some of the features there. So in this case, we have pretty simple space, right? We have just this search management standard. So it's a standard. But what we did, we used SKOS concepts as type, as subject, and as relation. And so these concepts obviously they have specific URIs. And what you can do, you can start using them in Sparkle queries. So one of the things that add-on does is it basically lets you query pages that you indexed with Sparkle. So in this case, what I did, actually, let me bring this in. See if I so in this case, I'm aggregating across two sources, and I'm using GraphDB. So this source is a simple RDF file. So we're assuming that we're storing some information in GitHub, and we want to pull this together with something that we're storing in Confluence. And so in this case, there's a Sparkle endpoint. So if I run it, you can see that I'm actually getting several results. So result number one is whatever I pulled in from GitHub, from a knowledge graph that I kind of started building there. And then the second result that you get is obviously a page that we created in Confluence. You know how we use nickel ore mining here on the page. And so obviously with SKOS, you can use preferred and alternative labels. And one of the things this lets you do is you can now search by alternative labels. SKOS notation lets you add arbitrary identifiers to SKOS concepts. And so in this case, notation is actually ANSI code 0806. So if you spent most of your day with actual ANSI codes as opposed to names, you can now start using ANSI codes here to do the search, and you will find the page, even though visually it doesn't have ANSI codes. Once you start using the labels, it's really hard to actually keep all the pages in sync and kind of keep maintaining the labels. And so in this case, you do get a bit of refactoring support. So for example, let's say that we, for sake of argument, we don't want to use ANSIC anymore. We want to stick with our maybe taxonomy for Confluence and investment management capability, but we don't want to use ANSIC anymore, right? So let's just talk about this use case. So let's say we want taxonomy for Confluence, taxonomy for policy. So let's import that. And what that will actually do is it will effectively remove some of the concepts from taxonomy. So you see that now in draft we only have one scheme, 5 concepts. We haven't added anything, haven't updated anything, but we removed a whole bunch. So now if I want to start switching to a draft snapshot, we need to actually check the impact and see how many pages are impacted that are using that are already using the concepts in our taxonomy. So we can see that there's one concept, there's one page that's impacted. So now if I complete the switch, what happens is that concept will be removed from the page, will be replaced by a plain text. If you're updating taxonomy to a new version, you'll actually see that, well, perhaps you changed the label. Let's say you change preferred label. You'll see the new name on the page. So the whole Confluence will be kept up to date. So if I continue this, well, obviously it tells me there's a new version published, right? And if I look at the page, I'd still be using so I'd still be using the standard, right? We got rid of capability model, so there's now no subject, and you can see that the iron ore mining is replaced with just a plain text.